you want me to talk a little bit about the egel, about the golden calf? Now, the overriding question, the big question is, how could people who 40 days before saw God? Now, exactly how God looks, I don't know. But they certainly more saw than anybody else did. The experience of Havsina was never repeated again. 40 short days later, they would fall so low as to make a golden calf, to create what amounts to an idol. Now, first of all, the initial point is the one I already told you yesterday. And that is that the entire experience of the Exodus, the birth of the Jewish nation, has an enormous deficiency in it. In other words, when we talk about Mashiach versus the birth of the Jewish nation, Mashiach is considered a parallel event of the birth of the Jewish nation. Just like when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, there were miracles that had no precedent and were never repeated again. When Mashiach comes, the Pasuk says there's going to be miracles of such a caliber. But in between miracles of that magnitude and with that frequency, never happened. That year and a half, beginning with the 10 plagues and culminating with the event at Sinai, miracles were so frequent that nobody knew what was natural and what was supernatural. And then the world went back to being a world. But for that short period of time, it was a completely supernatural existence. But there was a fundamental weakness in the whole system, and that was the Jewish people's lack of readiness and worthiness. And I'll explain it to you. When the Jewish people went into Mitzrayim, unfortunately, whether we liked it or not, we were destined to be slaves. Avraham Avinu had negotiated this with the Eibishter hundreds of years before. According to the Midrashim, Avraham was given a choice: Golus or Gehenna, exile or hell, and he preferred Golus. And I don't know if I ever discussed this with you, so I'll say it now, and if I did, please tell me, so I'll go through it quickly. That the difference between Golus and Gehenna is an extremely painful experience, much more painful than Golus is. But it's acute. Acute means you're going through this extremely, extremely painful experience, but you're awake. You feel the pain extremely intensely, and perhaps you even know its purpose, its usefulness. It's extremely painful. It's probably shorter in terms of time, but it's more purposeful. Golus is a numbness, is a spiritual state of lack of awareness. That's much less painful because you're numb, you're almost asleep, but it's drawn out. And it's just like a bottomless pit. The number one problem with Golus is that we have no sense of its end. I don't know. Why would we want both? We'd want neither. We find in Torah, Yankov Avinu and then many others, whenever they wanted to reveal when Mashiach would come, they lost their Ruach HaKodesh. It's one of the rules of Golus is nobody knows its end. I don't know if you people are familiar. There's a book called Daniel. In the end of Daniel, chapter 12, he makes predictions for Mashiach is going to come, and people have been trying to figure out what those predictions mean forever. And I have read the Rishonim, each one of them predicted that these psukim in Daniel are a reference to time which is right near them. But nobody got it right, obviously, because we're still waiting for Mashiach to come. So Daniel predicted the coming of Mashiach, but as the pasuk itself says, that this matter is sealed, nobody knows when Mashiach is coming. Why? That's the nature of Golus. It's a bottomless pit. It ends. No doubt about it. Just like Yidden left Mitzrayim, Mashiach comes. But part of the process of Golus is it's a drawn out, meaningless monotony. It's like, what are we doing here? What are we accomplishing? So Gehenna is a much more acute, perhaps purposeful pain. Golus is more numb, is less painful, but the pain of Golus is its senselessness. Now, as Shif from Meir pointed out, I can remember a few Golus that sounded like hell to me, and your point is well taken, and the response to that is evidently Golus is even worse than that. How that's possible is beyond me. But Gehenna is evidently so painful that we have no concept of what pain is. The proof is Avraham chose Golus. Maybe today Avraham Avinu a choice. Okay, and if you wanted to say philosophically, the choice, would you want a shorter, more direct experience of an acute pain, or a drawn-out experience of a pain which is more numbing? And Avraham chose the latter. That's what it says in Midrashim. Okay? So we got to go into Golus. Now, why do we have to go into Golus? That's the part of the story which is, of course, why do we have to go through suffering? Why is it necessary? It's a story for another time. But essentially it has to do with becoming a nation. To become a nation, the old status has to be erased so a new status can come into existence. But we'll leave that philosophy and that controversy for a different time. Yidden went into Golus. What was supposed to happen? They were supposed to go through hardships, but they were supposed to remain loyal to God in spite of them. What was loyalty to God? What was loyalty to God in those days? They didn't have the mitzvahs. Right? You people probably know that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov kept the mitzvahs, but only the others. Right? Their opinion said the Shvatim didn't even have a halacha of Jews. You know that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were considered Jews. Many say that the sons of the Shvatim had dinim of b'nei nech, had the din of Gentiles, and that's why they were able to eat milk and meat or whatever other supposed transgressions. They were able to drink wine in Egypt. They didn't know that Yosef was Yosef, right? They didn't know Yosef was Yosef. And it says in the Pasuk that when they had that feast, Vayishtu vayishkiru imay, they drank and they were drunk with him. And Rashi tells us that neither the brothers nor Yosef had drunk any wine for the entire 22 years of separation. To drink wine in Egypt is like drinking idol worship wine, which we just learned yesterday in Rambam, or those who learn Sefer HaMitzvahs. You're not allowed to drink yain. It's a biblical prohibition. Why were they drinking really treifa wine? Because they didn't have a halacha of Jews, and they were allowed to drink treifa wine. A goy has 7 mitzvahs, not 613. So the Yidden in Egypt, in all likelihood, didn't have a din of a b'nei Yisrael, but a din of a ben Noach. Essentially, they had to be loyal to one God and not become pagan, idolatrous. And it didn't happen. In other words, Golus Mitzrayim was more effective than it should have been. The Egyptian exile was not only a physical exile, it was a spiritual exile. The Jewish nation lost their identity. They became slaves, not just to the Egyptians, but to the Egyptian gods, to the Egyptian ideology. So, if they had suffered through Golus and Mitzrayim, and remain loyal to the Eibishter, when they would go out of Mitzrayim and receive the Torah, they would have been so conditioned, so ready. Forget about not making a golden calf. Mashiach would have come right then. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So the Eibishter was left with 2 choices. He gave Avraham 2 choices, now he had 2 choices. Choice number 1 is wait for them to get ready, and then take them out of Mitzrayim. Choice number 2, take them out of Mitzrayim and let them use the Torah to deserve the Torah. And the Eibishter chose the second. Why? Because he gave Avraham a date. He said to Avraham Avinu, this is the date. We're not going past this point. The date was 400 years or 430 years, right? All the numbers that we all know how messed up are so hard to understand. But there had to be an end point. Mashiach, Golus Mitzrayim had to end. So the Eibishter therefore chose to take us out of Mitzrayim, notwithstanding our lack of readiness, and said, okay, now use the Torah to deserve your exodus. So the entire experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim has the deficiency, has the fault of being given to a nation of people who are unworthy of it. Which explains one of the really odd Rashis. I mean, these are things, we all say them and we think about them, but if we would think about the reality of it, it would absolutely stagger us. Rashi says in Chumash that 20% of the Jews left. You know what that means? 80% stayed. Why? They didn't want to leave. We guesstimate that about 2 million Jews left Egypt. That means 8 million Jews stayed in Mitzrayim, and according to Rashi, died in 3 days. Remember to think about the 3 days of darkness? It's an absolutely staggering thought. They buried 8 million Jews. They died because they didn't want to leave Mitzrayim. It's so hard to understand this in Pshat, but it's one of those things we read, yeah, let's go next. When we think about the reality of these things, say, how could that possibly be? But okay, like I said, controversies notwithstanding, the Yidden left Mitzrayim. They were the choicest ones, right? Assuming that we go according to this Rashi, that there were the 20% who did have the courage to trust Moshe Rabbeinu and go into a desert rather than eat, the salty herrings that the Egyptians gave them, which made them sick to their stomach. So they should be slaves and not have to worry about the next piece of bread. The slave mindset, the slave mentality. They go out of Mitzrayim. And they're experiencing miracle after miracle after miracle. But you know what it's like? It's like pouring water on desert sand. Pouring water on rock. It wasn't fertile. It didn't take. Another miracle, another miracle, another miracle. There was lack of a conditioning. The keli, the vessel, had holes. The vessel was dirty. The vessel was unsuited for all these revelations. But this is the Eibishter's approach. This is how Hashem operates. The birth of the Jewish nation is like chinuch of a child. When children are very young, what do? You make such a big deal of everything that they do. We celebrate it, then we honor it, we make a party, and we reward them, we praise them until we are sick of our own exaggerations. Yeah. Then they get a little older, and they actually become good at what they're doing, and as they get better, our compliments subside. This isn't necessarily wrong. It's called chinuch. The beginning of everything has to be very dramatic, has to be very, very exciting and inspirational. Why? You got to get it going. But once the snowball starts to collect mass and start to tumble down the hill, it has its own inertia, it has its own momentum, its own strength. That's why when children are very, very young, we provide so much artificial energy and motivation for everything that they do. And as they get older, we allow them to generate their own energy. So they're going at a different pace, but a pace with greater integrity. So the Eibishter, the birth of the Jewish nation, was like the rearing of a baby, a little child. It was full of miracles, full of miracles. Right, and many of the miracles seem almost unnecessary. They needed 10 plagues. I mean, I'm asking you, God couldn't take us out with 10, and 9 plagues wouldn't do. 1 plague wouldn't do. You know what? You can skip the plagues. Come in the middle of the night, make the Egyptians sleep a little deeper than normal. Take them out with a couple of helicopters, or I don't know, whatever. You get the Israeli military to come in and take them out. Yeah. So much of what happened that surrounds the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt, there are explanations for it, but you could almost make the case, and as Chumash says so, the Eibishter was displaying, was showing off, which he doesn't typically do. It says in the Chumash, the Eibishter says, I want to do many miracles. It's not typical of God. It was an unusual event. Here's the problem. Forgive me. Let me finish my thought. Or thoughts. I'm looking at the clock. But it was all given to a people who were not able to take it. And as a result, their memories were extremely short. Yesterday's miracle wasn't good enough for today. In other words, a miracle really should have 2 effects. The first effect of a miracle is the immediate effect. Hashem performs a miracle, yeah, thank you, okay, my troubles are solved, my troubles have been alleviated. But there's another effect of a miracle, and that is, it should make you realize, God's actually around. He's involved. He's got some control. The proof is that when He chooses to, He can mess around with nature and provide us services in supernatural ways. So when the Jewish people saw a miracle, they said, yeah, God's around. But they had absolutely no ability to carry that over to the next step. God will take care of us. So when they left Egypt, and the Eibishter was squeezing them, the Eibishter was messing with their heads, yeah? What did He do? He took them into a desert and forgot to give them water for 3 days. Anybody know the experience of not drinking for 3 days? Exactly. It's unimaginable. They just walked out. They crossed the border of Egypt. The Egyptians pursued them. They went into the Yam Suf. The Egyptians drowned. They collected more wealth. Now 3 days and not a drop of water. What's the Eibishter doing? What's he doing? What's he doing? What's he doing? He wants to get them to trust Him blindly. He's not going to let them die. But He's going to test them. And after 3 days they said, we can't take this anymore. I'm sorry, where's God? And it was considered a sin. It was considered a sin. It's quite if you think about it, it's quite a test. Right? If they had passed that test, I don't know how many more days they would have gone without water. But eventually, when it was a matter of, the Eibishter would have delivered water, And that would have been such an unbelievable testament to Jewish faith and trust. Who knows how far-reaching that positive event would have had. Let me remind you of a story in Tanakh. A very similar story. The great prophet Shmuel HaNavi, prophet Samuel, that Chazal tells was equivalent to Moshe and Aaron combined. He's one of the greatest Jews who ever lived, one of the greatest prophets. And I don't know if I've told this to you, but it should be noted, he created the Jewish nation. He literally created nationhood. When the Jews came into Israel, under Moshe and Yeshua, they were a nation. But when Yeshua passed away, they became tribes. Literally. They were so isolated that one tribe is at war and the other tribe is having parties. And they didn't know about one another. Now Egypt is not exactly, Israel is not exactly 3,000 miles. It's a tiny little place, relatively speaking. But they were so isolated from one another. Remember, they didn't associate as a people. Why not? There was a unifier. There was something that was meant to keep them together. Anybody know what that is? The Mishkan, Shiloh. They didn't go. For hundreds of years, they didn't go. Now there were a few fanatics who went from here and from the other place, and they would go and say, so what's doing in Naphtali? And how are the Jews in Menashe doing, But the majority of people stayed home, they didn't go. Shmuel Hanavi comes along. His mother brings him to the Beis Hamikdash, just a 2-year-old, and deposits him there. He grew up in the Beis. He had prophecy as a child, as an infant. The Tanakh tells us that somebody called him. So he ran to Eli and says, yes. He says, I didn't call you. I was back to sleep. And Shmuel, he's here, Shmuel. You guys know the Tanakh or not? So he goes back to Eli and says, yes. He says, I didn't call you. So finally Eli realizes the next time somebody calls you, say yes, respond. He had a prophecy as a boy, as a little baby. That's how holy he was. And he was the leader of the Jewish people for 12 years. And he did something that no leader had done before. He traveled. He didn't wait for the people to come to him, he went to the people. And he had an annual circuit. He just went all over Israel. And he met people.
He was a Lubavitch?
He was a Lubavitch. He was Baal Shem Tov. You know that it says in Sfarim? Jokes aside, it says in Sfarim the Baal Shem Tov was a Gilgal Shmuel Hanavi. And the Baal Shem Tov did exactly the same thing. What separated the Baal Shem Tov from all the great leaders before him, and even after him, was he didn't wait for you to come to him. The Baal Shem Tov was constantly on the move. He went to the people. That's exactly what Shmuel Hanavi did. And he just said, why don't you come to Shiloh? And people started coming, and all of a sudden people started to realize, hey, we're actually a nation. And when they finally became a nation, they said, we want a king. And Shmuel was so broken. Why? He says, you couldn't organize yourselves politically for 300 years. Who organizes you? The prophet, the temple. And now you want a political leader. For all these years you couldn't get your act together on a political level. It was only religion that brought you together, and now you're asking religion to give you political leadership. But he gave them the king anyway. As it says in the Chumash, in Tanakh, Hashem says to Shmuel, they were not being moyes, they were not disrespecting you, they were disrespecting me. That's what God says to the Navi Shmuel, but give them the king anyway. Anyway, they have a king Shaul. If you've ever read the Tanakh, there are a few people that you're going to feel worse for than King Shaul. Shaul and Reuven, I think, get the toughest rap in the Torah. Reuven is never forgiven for his sin. He's never forgiven for his sin. And according to Rashi, it wasn't even such a big sin. He can't do anything. He's just, that's it. And Shaul. And according to Hasidus, the reason this is so is because these people had such awesome souls. Shaul HaMelech was on a higher level than King David, okay? Spiritually. And the Eibishter wanted from him a measure of perfection, which was completely unimaginable. Listen to the scenario, okay? The Jews have a king, finally, right? So they have an army, finally, so they can defend themselves against who? The Palestinians. So what's new? The Philistines, yeah? Because the Philistines lived on the west, it's the southwest, in Plishtim, and they're just raiding the Jewish people's cities and towns, just making them miserable for hundreds of years. And they had an army, and they were ready to defend themselves. And the Navi said, by the way, get your army together, get ready to fight the Philistines, but don't start till I come. Okay, sounds reasonable to me, yeah? Here's the problem. The Navi doesn't come. And a day passes, and a second day passes, and a third day passes, and a fourth day. And the Plishtim are attacking, and the king is sitting with his army and doing nothing. And the generals come into him and say, Your Majesty, why do we make you into a king? Why? So we should all die very neatly and conveniently in one spot? Let's fight! He says, we have to wait. Apparently he couldn't tell him that the prophet told him to wait, I don't know. 7 days he waited. And he couldn't wait anymore. He started to go into battle. 5 minutes later, guess who makes his appearance? And Shmuel was so upset with him, you failed the test of God, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's the point? It required such unbelievable faith and trust on Shaul's part. Understand, you want to have faith is one thing. You got a nation of people who are counting on you to lead them into battle, and you're sitting and waiting, and no one knows for what. It was an unbelievable test. Just imagine Shaul had survived that test. And the same is true. The Jewish people go away from the Yam Suf, and for 3 days there's not a drop of water on their lips, and they finally rebel. Yeah? So when you think about it in real terms, and you combine the various factors, first of all, the real lack of readiness of Yidden for all these events. All these miracles were from the top. They were over the top. They were completely from Hashem. They were not really conditioned for these miracles. And you think about the fact that the Eibishter was giving them a hard time. The Eibishter was trying to get as much faith out of them as he could. So it has a context. And the same is true with the story of the golden calf. The Jewish people waited for Moshe to return. He didn't come back. Rashi tells us that they saw a simulated funeral. They saw a funeral in the sky. They saw the Malachim carrying Moshe Rabbeinu. What are they supposed to think? Right? Are you familiar with this Rashi? They saw the Malachim carrying Moshe Rabbeinu. The Satan came along and confused them. Now, you wonder why God would allow the Satan to do that. And the answer is because God expected more faith in the Jewish people. If Moshe said he's going to return, he's going to return. So the context of the making of the golden calf is A, the Eibishter was testing them, and B, faith was so difficult for them. It was so difficult for them to trust. You know, slaves are subhuman. They're not treated subhuman. They descend into subhumanness. Slaves know one thing. My master's going to give me bread. As long as I'm useful for work, he doesn't want to kill me. He's not going to beat me to the point where I can't work. He's going to give me shelter because he wants to keep me alive so I can do work and produce more slaves. That is the mentality of a slave. The notion of freedom has been so beaten out of him that freedom is more frightening than slavery itself. Why? Because if you're free, no one's giving you bread. You have to earn it yourself. And the slave would prefer the most abusive piece of bread that is sure, that is secure, to a free half a piece of bread. And you read the story of the Chumash, you see clearly the Jewish people reflecting that sentiment. Beginning with the 80% who chose not to leave. Okay, this is the backdrop. This is the framework for the egel, the golden calf, the psychological disposition of the Jewish people. But that's only the beginning of the story. I just repeated what I said yesterday with some embellishment. But there's another whole dimension to the story, and that is exactly what did they want? Did they want a substitute for God? What does it say in the Chumash? This man, Moshe, we don't know what happened to him. So Rashi says, and the Mefarshim certainly say this, they were not interested in replacing God. They were interested in replacing Moshe. Moses was the prophet. Moses was the liaison between God and man and God. Moses led the Jewish people. They followed his lead. Moses is God. They need a leader. It wasn't about substituting Hashem. It was about substituting the communicator, the link that connected the Jewish people to Hashem and Hashem to the Jewish people. There is an awesome Ramban. I wish I had more time. There's a Ramban which is so unique, and I believe it's originally in Ibn Ezra, who says something really edifying, enlightening, and I guess you could call it, you have to think about this to get this, because it's not so easy. We all wonder how Adam got involved. How did Adam get involved in making the golden calf? Adam had a nephew named Hur. Hur was the son of Miriam. We never met Hur, right? We know very little about his personality and his life and his times because the Torah doesn't tell us much about him. Hur was relatively young. Hur was relatively a young man, okay? Yitzhak was Hur's grandson. And if you do the mathematics, it turns out that Yitzhak, when he built the Beis HaMikdash, was about 8 or 9 years old. Okay? And how do we do the math? Because Kalev was Miriam's husband, okay? This is a really strange marriage. Kalev, you know Kalev with Yeshua, the two spies, was Miriam's husband. When the Jewish people went into Israel, he was about 85. Okay? Which means that Miriam was circa 50 years older than him. 48 to be exact. Literally, older than he was. Or 50 years older than he was. If Kalev was 85 when they went into Israel, he was 45 when they left Egypt. Kalev already had a great-grandson at that point. A great-grandson who was old enough to be the engineer of the entire Mishkan, named Bezalel. So how old was Kalev when he got married? How old was his son when he got married? How old was his son's son when he got married? For Bezalel to have been of sufficient age to build the Mishkan. Okay, he was 45 when the Mishkan was put together, and he had a great grandson who was mature enough to build a house of God. So he got married young, and everybody got married young. I mean, everyone got married approximately at the age of 12 or 13. It's the only way the math will stim. And who did he marry? A woman who was about 80. Pretty much, yeah. Kalev wasn't special neshama. Kalev wasn't a regular person, obviously. But that's how mathematics works out. But whatever the case, Chur was a very special soul, a very special neshama. And when Moshe Rabbeinu left the Har Sinai, he said to the Jewish people, you consult Aaron and Chur. Now Aaron was about, like I say, also in his 80s. Chur wasn't 8. Chur was 28, was 30. He was the grandfather of the Tzal. And when the Jewish people came to Aaron and said, build us an eagle, Chur said, absolutely not. So they killed him. They murdered him on the spot. And that's what it does in the pasuk by Yad Aaron. Aaron saw. So that's what did he see? He saw that if he's not going to make the golden calf, they're going to do it anyway. There'll be one obstacle less. But to be sure, that's not enough of an excuse. I mean, if you appreciate who Aaron HaKohen is, and you appreciate how serious God considers idol worship, it's not enough. It doesn't justify Aaron's actions. Why did he allow himself to get messed up, get entangled in this whole business? So the Ramban offers us a commentary which is, like I said, it's edifying, but it is a little bit controversial. You have to think about this very well. But I must give you background, and this is where the clock is an obstacle. The background is as follows. Excuse me?
Chur
was killed. The background is as follows. The Rambam has an entire chapter in his laws of idol worship, which, by the way, I suggest that you read it because it's a story. It doesn't require a lot of brain power. Just try to find the book and sit down and read it. In 15 minutes you'll do it. Where he asks the question, God created the world. Adam Rishon knew God personally, on whatever level that's possible, okay? Where did idol worship come from? Where did this notion of, God's not involved, or we can't relate directly to God, so we need all these helpers? How did this whole phenomena, this whole culture, which prevailed on the earth for thousands of years as the predominant spiritual structure, initiate? How did it start? And he says as follows. He says, the descendants of Adam Rishon was made by God himself, okay? And he made a good person. Adam and Chava were a little brighter than we are, okay? They were God's creations. They were perfect specimens. And their children and their grandchildren were also on a pretty high standard. They were very intelligent, and they had a very, very deep sense of reality. And they saw that God operates through a series of stages, of levels, what we call in Kabbalah and Chassidus Hishtalshlus. In other words, the energy, the life that God gives the world doesn't come directly from Him. It goes through intermediaries, whether you want to call them angels, you want to call them the signs of the astrological table, whatever it is. God's relationship with the world is complex. It goes through levels, passes through A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. Now, as religious people, we concede this. I mean, we have to be stupid to say there's no such thing as laws of nature. Laws of nature is a godly thing. God created laws of nature. The laws of nature govern the world, and pretty much the laws of nature tell you you're going to throw a rock up, it's going to land. As religious people, we have to believe that these forces that govern our lives as God's, so to speak, intermediaries, God's emissaries, are like the hammer in the hands of a craftsman. In other words, they don't have free will. You cannot say thank you to an angel for giving you breakfast because the angel doesn't have any free will. God said that the angels give breakfast, the angel gives breakfast. That kind of thing. So as religious people, we have an obligation to believe that whatever forces are involved in our lives are responsible directly to Hashem. They don't have free will. They do only what He wants. They're tools. These ancient theologians made a small mistake. And that is, they attributed independence, free will to these forces. And they said that the various spiritual forces that give life to the earth are following God's instructions, but they've got their own free will. And the initial idolaters believed in this concept of showing honor. They weren't worshipping the gods. They believed that everything comes from Mano, from one. But they said the Eibishter created this system, that the energy descends to the earth through a complex structure of heavenly or spiritual forces that are called, euphemistically, the gods, with a small g. So they figured, okay, let's show honor to the gods. Honor to the gods. Okay. Now, as time passed, people became less intelligent, and the focus shifted from honoring the gods to worshiping the gods. Instead of it being that the gods are the gods' mechanisms of sustenance to the earth, they gave independence to the gods. That's what idol worship means. Idol worship does not mean you deny one God. We had this discussion earlier this year. We talked about, even in the East, where they're certainly pagan, they believe in many gods, there is a concept of what the Gemara calls the God of gods. Remember we had that conversation. What was that group that you referred to? But you referred to a specific sect that predates Christianity. Right, the Celts. That they also have a concept of many gods, but they do not deny that there is a super God, which is the truth. The mistake they make is that they render the sub-God, so to speak, independent of the super God. That's what idol worship means. Idol worship doesn't mean you say there's no one God. You say that the one God created heaven and earth is out of control, and He's given over control to others. That's idol worship from a theological, from a mystical point of view, from a philosophical point of view. Okay. But here's the but: if a person gives recognition, acknowledges the heavenly forces, right, the gods, but insists that the gods don't have free will and they are as tools in God's hand, it's not so bad. In other words, the first pagans were not pagan at all. The originators of the concept of idolatry saw the various gods simply as God's arms and legs. He uses his right hand to be kind, he uses his left hand to be severe, what have you. They didn't say these gods have power, they said these are God's tools. But as time went on, these forces went from being God's tools or God's arms and legs to being sub-gods, being independent operators. God's out of control. That's idol worship. So if somebody comes along and links the so-called gods to the Eibishter and says these gods don't have any free will, they're tools in God's hand, that's not idol worship. That's not idol worship at all. Why? Because you're saying that these entities are simply the vehicles for God. I'll give you a real example, okay? We mentioned it the other day. Throughout the Chumash, God is represented by a cloud. Is it idol worship to recognize the cloud? Why not? Because the cloud is simply a mist that God uses as a gestalt. God doesn't look like anything. God is absolutely invisible. He's formless. If He wants us to see Him, He's got to give us a representation. He has to give us a gestalt. Without it, we don't know Him. Right? God's here right now, right? The blackboard was erased. And it's a mystery. We don't see Him, right? Hang on, if you don't mind. So the Eibishter presented Himself in the form of a cloud. There was nothing wrong with the Jews saying, hey, look, the presence of God is there, why not? Because nobody celebrated the cloud. You celebrated if you will, the soul of the cloud, the energy within it, the truth within it. If somebody gives honor to the heavenly bodies and relates to them as the Jewish people related to that cloud, it's not a sin at all. Okay? Now we get to Aaron and the golden calf. When Aaron made the golden calf, his intent was that mystically there's a so-called heavenly throne. And the heavenly throne has four animals, right, four faces. Those of you who are a little bit more into that sense are more familiar with this. Yeah, there's the face of an ox, and there's the face of an eagle, and there's the face of a lion, and the face of an eagle of a man. The Jewish people were in a desert. Desert is a place of gevura. Of the four countenances, the four faces that carry the heavenly throne, that, so to speak, are the angels that support the throne, the animal that represents gevura, strength, is the ox. So He made an ox. And the ox was meant to be was meant to be exactly the same thing the cloud was. A physical manifestation, or a physical tool that's representing the Eibishter. In other words, Jewish people have to go through the desert. Someone's got to lead them. So the ox will lead them. But what's the ox? It's like a cloud. It's a gestalt through which the Eibishter travels. So Aaron HaKohen had no intent of making an idol. In other words, Rashi tells us Aaron did it. He said, listen, my nephew just got killed. I'm going to get myself killed. They're going to do it anyway. But Aaron's Kohen's intent was not that at all, according to this Nachman, this Ramban. And again, I believe you can. The first source of it is the Even Ezer, who in general is very creative in his interpretations of the Torah. He wasn't planning to make an idol at all. He was planning to make a likeness, a gestalt that would represent the presence of God. And to be sure, the Keruvim, the cherubs, the Holy of Holies are in a certain way the same thing. The Keruvim are a place where God manifests. And there's all kinds of restrictions. If you make more than two, it's a sin. If you make them out of silver, it's a sin. Why? Precisely for this reason. Only in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is there allowed to be this likeness. Outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I told you this once before, that people who are very, very religious smash off the nose of dolls. You know that. I told you this once before. Because you're not allowed to make a countenance. And the nose represents the sign of life, of humanness. You smash the nose. When we were kids, we were teenagers, so we had one of the like parades. We made a Beis Hamikdash. We worked so hard. And we made the Kalim. It's a beautiful ark with these two cherubs. They took dolls, huge dolls, and they put wings on them. They sprayed it in gold, and they stuck them to this box. And it was gorgeous. It was really, really beautiful. And we worked for weeks. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, Lag BaOmer, and two old grouches, pardon me for saying that, lumber by and say, hey, you're not allowed to have those likenesses over there. You got to smash the nose. And the person who had designed that Aaron had already smashed off the noses. He knew the halacha. He fell off the nose. But he was so insulted. Say something nice about Islam. Isn't this gorgeous? Nothing. Just said, smash the nose. The only thing that smashed the nose. But okay, listen, that's called generations.
So Aaron just wanted to represent God
right.
in the way that he thought it was allowed.
He wanted to create, they're claiming Moshe Rabbeinu is gone. God, he wanted to create for them the equivalent, a thing that people could look at as a symptom of the presence of God, not God. What happened? Along came the Erev Rav, along came the ones who had joined the Jewish nation because it was politically, what's the word I'm looking for? Politically opportune, and they made it into a God. They just said, this is God, and this is God. This is not a gestalt of God. This is God. Aaron HaKohen makes the golden calf and says, Chag LaHashem Mocher, we're going to feast to God tomorrow. And the Erev Rav says, this is God. This is your God, Israel. In other words, they separated the calf, and the calf had supernatural power. The calf was walking around eating grass. This stated in Tilim. It says in Tilim, Kapitel Kuv Zayin, which describes, by the way, there's another version of history of the Jewish people leaving Egypt in the Tilim, in Psalms. It's chapter, I think it's 107. You can read, a lot of the details of the story of our Exodus and Chumash are in Tilim, Kapitel Kuv Vav, 106. And it says in this Kapitel, where am I? Chapter, it's 106:20. V'yamiru as kavedam, they replaced his honor, or they rebelled against his honor. B'savnit shaydech alesa, with the gestalt, the likeness of an axe eating grass. So Aaron was held liable for what? Not for what he did, but for how what he did was interpreted. Aaron never made an idol. Aaron should have anticipated the way it was going to be interpreted and never done it. But his intent was to create, in effect, a keruv. The same way there were cherubs in the Holy of Holies that represented the presence of Hashem. He wanted to make why did he make an eagle? Because they were in the desert, the side of Gevurah. This is what he chose, right? Now, here is the punchline. In last week's Parsha, there's a small pasuk buried someplace in the middle of all the other stuff. Last week's Parsha, by the way, is one of the most informative Parshas in Chumash. There are a few Parsha Chumash, they're just chock full of information. I think B'Shalach is packed, Kisisa is packed, and I think Chukas is packed. There's just so much in these Parshas, far more than a typical Parsha. It's like, you just doesn't end kind of thing. And it says, Elekei Masecha Lo Yitasalach, 5 words. A God of Masech, of an image you're not allowed to make for you. So the Ramban whispers in one line. He says, since when Aaron made the golden calf, the Jews separated the calf from God, you're not allowed to do it anymore. A new prohibition. You're not even allowed to make a likeness that you interpret to be a representation of Hashem. Because the Jewish people, whatever it is, we'll talk about that another time. Because the Jewish people took what was meant to be a gestalt, a representation of the Eibishter, separated from the Eibishter, made it into a God with the small g rather than the large g. No more. Not allowed to do it anymore.
Not before, because was that not a prohibition in Torah?
Okay, so you got to look carefully in the Chumash, and I learned this, and when I learned it, I had the same question. The Ramban knew the Bible pretty good, I got to tell you. So I went back and I looked through every place in the Chumash until Pashas Kisisa, which was allusions to idol worship. It never prohibits making a physical likeness. It prohibits all kinds of other stuff. But the making of a physical likeness that is meant to represent the Eibishter is a sin. It was a prohibition added in the Ramban's view. Don't forget, there's probably a dozen other opinions or interpretations that Aaron never intended to make a calf, an idol. The Yidden interpreted his actions as such, and the Eibishter says, okay, we're not doing this experiment anymore. It's a whole new insight into the whole story of the golden calf. And I think it's fascinating. And you know what the best part of this? I didn't say one thing that was original. It all comes from the Mefarshim. Now, if you guys can ask your questions.
Why they say Asalanu Elokim?
You know that Malachim are called Elokim, angels are called Elokim. You know that judges are called Elokim? Elokim means a koyach, a strength.
So they didn't want to replace Hashem before them.
Well, that depends who you ask. Aaron understood what they wanted as not to replace Hashem, and there were probably different kinds. There were those who really wanted a replacement for Moshe, and then there were those who had sinister plans.
So it's so controversial that they say Asalanu.
Elokim, right? And by the way, Elokim is Lashon Rabbi. It actually says Elokus Rabbi Hisavah. They wanted many gods. However, we address that question.
Doesn't it say also, these are your gods, Israel?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. This is what the Erev Rav said. Aaron made the Yegel, and he said, let's going to make a service to God tomorrow. And they said, this is your God. Okay. That was the point of the vision. Right, that was the sin.
These are your gods, but it's a calf of people.
Right, separating it from the Eibishter. Okay. Not as a representation of the Eibishter, but the calf itself. Which means mystically the power of Gevura. The power of Gevura is your God. Not that the power of Gevura is just another one of God's many tools. The power of Gevura is a self-contained energy, and they're going to worship the power. We live in the desert. In the desert, strength pervades. Everything is extreme, hot, cold, whatever. We're going to worship Gevura, rather than see Gevura as the Eibishter's left hand or whatever.
So is there exactly what we're not allowed to have?
You're not allowed to create likenesses, images. To be very, very honest, to make a doll that doesn't look exactly like a human child is preferable to a doll that has real human features. Because in halacha, it's controversial. It's not so simple.
And I even read that even pictures.
Okay, this is another question. There were generations of Jews who wouldn't allow themselves to be photographed.
Yeah.
You should know. I don't know if you've ever seen. There's a whole book. An album of photographs of the Rebbe officiating at weddings.
Yeah,
you see that book?
sure.
Right. You'll notice that before the Rebbe was Rebbe, the Rebbe is so cool about it. But whenever they're taking a picture of him and he realizes it, he's scratching his nose. It's not. That's right. Because the face is represented by the nose. He wasn't scratching his nose. He was blocking his nose. Right? Some people go, that was a little more classy. When the Rebbe became a Rebbe, he continued to do it. And Trainer, the photographer, said to the Rebbe, I'm making a living on this. So the Rebbe stopped and allowed himself to be photographed. I know a Jew, should live me well, who told me the following story. And I think it's a very compelling story. There are communities of Jews that till today don't take pictures. And the individual, this rabbi that I know, was close to the Rebbe, to the previous Rebbe, and to the Kloisenberger Rebbe of Shalom. And he had these different influences. Some fanatic, I don't know where, sat him down and told him that pictures are a sin and it's idol worship. He had a collection of photographs of his parents and his brothers and sisters who were all gone right after the war. He had pictures of the previous Rebbe, pictures of the Amshin of it. He's a slightly hot-blooded person. He took the whole stock and burnt them. And he later felt terrible. He felt, first of all, he has no pictures of his parents, can you imagine? And second of all, he burnt pictures of the previous Rebbe. He burnt pictures of the Amshnav, who was a very big tzaddik. And he went into this Rebbe. And he said to the Rebbe, what's this business with pictures? Halachically it's questionable. It's not absolutely prohibited because it's a two-dimensional image, it's not a three-dimensional image. But what's this thing? Hasidim are always supposed to be extra religious. Is it good or is it not good? And here's what the Rebbe told him. But I would like to preface what the Rebbe told him by the following. This is not halacha. What I'm about to tell you is not law. This is sort of spiritual. Okay? How you reconcile this with Jewish law is a separate issue that I'm not going to address. I'm just not qualified. The Rebbe told him the following. He says, you're really right. There is something mystically on hold about creating likenesses, pictures. But when the great tzaddikim, the great holy men, saw that Jewish people would benefit by having their pictures and being able to see their likenesses, so they removed whatever spiritual negative energy is attached to photographs, and when they removed it altogether. Interesting.
Then we brought them together.
Whatever negative thing can be attached to having pictures is no longer. On a spiritual level. Again, on a halachic level, you've got to speak to a rabbi.